church doors exploded open. Not a gentle push. Not a respectful entrance. They slammed against the interior walls with a crack that echoed through the sanctuary like a gunshot. Every head turned. Prayers stopped mid-sentence. Hymns died in throats. The organ player's hands froze above the keys. 3 men in dark uniforms stormed down the center aisle. ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Their boots hammered against the marble floor. Each step a declaration, a demand, an invasion. At the front of the church, beside a mahogany casket draped in white roses, stood a woman in black. Her veil obscured her face, but her hands were visible, trembling, gripping the edge of the coffin like it was the only thing anchoring her to earth. She was the widow, and she had no idea what was about to happen. "Don't move." The lead officer's voice detonated through the sanctuary. The widow's head snapped up. Her eyes, red from crying, swollen from sleepless nights, widened in confusion. "Step away from the coffin," the officer barked, his hand hovering near his belt. "Now!" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "What's happening?" Another voice, "Is this real?" The priest, a gray-haired man in white robes, stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Sir, this is a funeral, a sacred. I don't care if it's Easter Sunday," the officer snapped. "That woman is under arrest." The widow's knees buckled. She grabbed the casket harder, her fingers digging into the polished wood. "What?" Her voice was barely a whisper. I don't understand." The officer closed the distance in 3 strides. He grabbed her arm, hard. "You are under arrest for immigration fraud." His voice rose, ensuring everyone in the church could hear. "And for the murder of your husband." The word murder hung in the air like smoke. For half a second, the world stopped. Then the widow screamed. It was a raw, guttural sound. The cry of someone whose world had just shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. "No!" she sobbed. "No! My husband just died. Please!" Metal cuffs snapped around her wrists. Click, click. The sound echoed louder than any prayer ever spoken in that church. Someone in the crowd shouted, "What is wrong with you?" Another voice, "She's mourning her husband." But the officer didn't care. He yanked the widow to her feet, her veil slipping, her face now fully visible. Tears streaming, makeup smeared, eyes wide with terror and disbelief. "This woman," the officer announced to the crowd, his voice loud and cold, "married a billionaire for his money. Now he's dead, and we have reason to believe she killed him." A wave of shocked murmurs rolled through the church. Some people gasped. Some whispered to each other. Some, God help them, believed him instantly. The widow was dragged down the aisle. Her heels scraped against the marble. She looked back at the coffin. At her husband, the man she had loved, cared for, sacrificed everything for. "I didn't do anything," she cried. "I loved him. I loved him." But her voice was drowned out by the chaos. At the back of the church, standing quietly among the mourners, was another woman. White, elegant, dressed in a tailored black suit that cost more than most people's rent. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shocked. She was watching, and she was smiling. If you believe an 01 should be arrested at their spouse's funeral, hit that like button right now, and stay with me, because what happens next exposes a lie that will blow your mind. Outside the church, cameras flashed. News crews had somehow already arrived, or maybe they'd been tipped off. The widow was shoved against a dark government SUV, her cuffed hands twisted behind her back. She winced. "Please," she whispered. "Can I just say goodbye? Please. He's my husband." The officer leaned close, his breath hot against her ear. "You should have thought about that before you poisoned him." Her head snapped up. "I didn't. Save it for the interrogation." Behind them, the church doors opened again. The elegant woman from inside stepped out, heels clicking against the stone steps. This was Catherine Ellis, the ex-wife. She moved with the kind of confidence that comes from years of privilege, the certainty that the world would bend to her will because it always had. She approached the lead officer, lowering her voice just enough to sound conspiratorial, concerned, credible. "Agent Bradford," she said softly. "I need to tell you something." He turned. "Mom." "That woman," she gestured toward the widow, "is an illegal immigrant. She came here on a fraudulent visa. She seduced my ex-husband while he was dying, manipulated him, married him for his money, and then," she paused, letting her voice crack just slightly, "I believe she killed him." Bradford's jaw tightened. "Do you have proof?" "I have timelines. I have witnesses. I have bank records showing massive transfers to her accounts just days before he died." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through documents. "And I have texts where she talked about making sure he doesn't suffer long." The officer nodded slowly. No warrant was shown. No evidence was verified. Just accusation, wrapped in authority, delivered by a white woman in an expensive suit. The widow lifted her head, mascara streaking her cheeks. "She's lying," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "He was sick. I took care of him. I loved him." Bradford laughed. A short, bitter bark. "Yeah, that's what they all say." He opened the SUV door and shoved her inside. The door slammed shut. Catherine stood on the steps, arms crossed, watching, still smiling. 5 years earlier, the man now lying in that coffin had not been standing in a courtroom or signing checks. He had been lying in a hospital bed, wires snaking from his chest, machines beeping steadily beside him. His name was Alexander Pierce, 63 years old, billionaire real estate developer, and he was dying. Not quickly, not dramatically, but slowly, painfully, inevitably. The doctors had explained it in careful clinical terms. A degenerative neurological disease, aggressive and unforgiving. Treatment would be expensive, exhausting, and ultimately only delay the inevitable. Across the room stood his wife at the time, Catherine Ellis, 47, blonde, beautiful in the way that wealth allows you to be beautiful well into middle age. She didn't ask how long he had. She didn't ask what she could do. She asked one question. "How much will this cost?" Alexander stared at her. "Catherine, I'm serious, Alexander." "How much?" "Because if we're going to be spending millions on treatment, I need to know how that affects our assets." "Our assets? Not your health. Not our future. Our assets." 3 weeks later, divorce papers arrived. She wanted half of everything. What followed wasn't grief. It was war. Court hearings dragged on for 5 years. 5 years of lawyers arguing over properties, accounts, investments, while Alexander's health deteriorated. Catherine fought harder for money than she ever fought for him. She stopped visiting the hospital. She stopped calling. She simply disappeared from his life except when she appeared in court to demand more. And then, during one of his long hospital stays, someone else appeared. A nurse introduced him to a woman named Aisha. Aisha Bennett, 38 years old, black, quiet, kind. She wasn't one of his nurses. She was a friend of a friend, someone who volunteered at the hospital, reading to patients, keeping them company. She didn't ask about his money. She didn't ask about his properties. She asked, "How are you feeling today?" And she meant it. Over the months, as Alexander's condition worsened, Aisha became the one constant in his life. She was the one who fed him when his hands shook too badly to hold a spoon. The one who slept upright in uncomfortable hospital chairs because she refused to leave him alone overnight. The one who held his hand during treatments that left him weak and vomiting. When he cried, and he did cry often because pain and fear and loneliness have a way of breaking even the strongest men, she didn't turn away. When he got worse, she didn't leave. When everyone else walked out of the room, overwhelmed or uncomfortable or simply done with the reality of watching someone die, she stayed. They married quietly 3 years before his death. No cameras. No celebration. Just a small ceremony in the hospital chapel, with a handful of close friends and a minister who understood that love doesn't always look like what you expect. Catherine, of course, was furious. "He's not in his right mind," she told her lawyers. "She manipulated him. This marriage isn't valid." But the courts disagreed. Alexander was lucid, competent, and very, very clear about what he wanted. Long before his final breath, he made a decision. One that would change everything. The ICE detention facility was cold. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Aisha sat in a metal chair, hands still cuffed, her black dress wrinkled and stained with tears. Across from her sat Agent Bradford, the man who'd arrested her at the funeral. "Let's start simple," he said, leaning back. "Where were you born?" "Chicago," Aisha said quietly. "Illinois." He raised an eyebrow. "Got a birth certificate?" "Yes." "Passport?" "Yes." "Then why," he said slowly, "do we have a report that you're here illegally?" Aisha looked up, her eyes red but steady. "Because someone lied to you," Bradford scoffed. "Right. And I suppose you also didn't marry a dying billionaire for his money?" "I married him because I loved him." "How convenient. And now he's dead, and you inherit everything." "He chose to leave me everything," Aisha said, her voice strengthening. "Because his ex-wife abandoned him when he got sick. Because I was the one who stayed." Bradford leaned forward. "Here's what I think happened. I think you saw an opportunity. Old, sick, rich man. You played the part, the caring nurse, the devoted companion. You got him to marry you, got him to change his will, and then you made sure he didn't live long enough to change his mind." Aisha's jaw tightened. "That's not true." "Then prove it." "I can't prove a negative. But I can tell you this." She looked him dead in the eye. "Alexander was dying long before I met him. The medical records will show that. His illness was documented. Progressive. Terminal. I didn't kill him. Time did." Bradford smiled. "We'll see what the autopsy says." Outside the detention facility, a black Mercedes pulled up. A man in a tailored charcoal suit stepped out. Victor Coleman, 60 years old. Alexander Pierce's personal attorney for over 2 decades. He'd been in a meeting in Manhattan when he got the call. Now he was here, and he was furious. He strode through the front doors, credentials already in hand. "I'm here for Aisha Pierce," he told the desk officer. "And you are her attorney, Victor Coleman. And unless you want a civil rights lawsuit that will make national headlines, you'll release her immediately." The officer blinked. "Sir, she's being held on suspicion of..." "On suspicion of nothing," Coleman interrupted. "You arrested a U.S. citizen at her husband's funeral without a warrant, without evidence, based solely on the word of a bitter ex-wife with a financial motive to discredit her. That's not law enforcement. That's harassment." The officer hesitated. Coleman didn't. "Where is she?" 10 minutes later, Aisha was led into a small conference room. When she saw Coleman, she nearly collapsed with relief. "Victor, don't say anything," he said gently, guiding her to a chair. "Not yet. Let me handle this." He turned to Agent Bradford, who'd followed them in. "Do you have a warrant for her arrest?" Bradford shifted. "We have credible evidence." "That's not what I asked. Do you have a warrant?" "We're conducting an investigation." "Based on what?" "An accusation from a woman who has everything to gain from discrediting my client." Coleman pulled out his phone. "Let me make this very clear, Agent Bradford. Aisha Pierce is a U.S. citizen, born in Chicago. I have her birth certificate, her passport, her social security records. She is here legally. Any claim to the contrary is slander." Bradford's face reddened. "What about the murder allegation?" "Alexander Pierce died of a documented terminal illness. His medical team can confirm that. There was no foul play. There was no poison. There was a man who was dying, and a woman who loved him enough to stay by his side until the end." Bradford crossed his arms. "The ex-wife has evidence." "The ex-wife," Coleman said coldly, "is a woman scorned. She left Alexander when he got sick. She spent 5 years in court trying to drain him dry. And when he remarried someone who actually cared about him, she couldn't stand it. So she's using you, using federal authority, to terrorize an innocent woman." Silence. Coleman leaned forward. "Release her, now, or I'm calling every news outlet in the state, and making sure the world knows that IC arrested a grieving widow at her husband's funeral based on lies. Bradford stared at him. Then slowly he pulled out a key. The cuffs came off. Aisha rubbed her wrists, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. Coleman put a hand on her shoulder. "We're not done yet, but you're going home." CTA. If you've ever seen power abused like this, you need to subscribe to this channel. These stories matter, and this one is far from over. Hit that subscribe button and let's keep going. 3 days later, the investigation was in full swing. Federal authorities had taken over from ICE, and they weren't playing games. Medical records were subpoenaed. Text messages between Catherine and Agent Bradford were uncovered. Bank records were analyzed. And then Victor Coleman made a phone call. "I need to show you something," he told the lead investigator. Something Alexander recorded before he died. The video was played in a federal office. On screen, Alexander Pierce appeared, weak, pale, sitting in a hospital bed, oxygen tubes in his nose, his hands trembling slightly. But his eyes were clear, and his voice was steady. "My name is Alexander James Pierce," he began. "I am of sound mind and body, well, sound mind anyway." Faint smile. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone. And if you're watching this, it probably means someone is trying to challenge my will. So let me be very, very clear." He took a breath. "My former wife, Catherine, left me when I fell ill. She didn't visit. She didn't call. She cared more about my bank account than my life. For 5 years, she dragged me through court trying to take half of everything I built. She wanted my wealth, not my life." His expression softened. "My wife, Aisha, saved me. Not from death, no one could do that, but from dying alone. She fed me. She bathed me. She held my hand when I was scared. She stayed when everyone else left." He looked directly into the camera. "Every property, every account, every asset, it all belongs to her. Not because she manipulated me, not because I was confused or coerced, but because she earned it. She gave me love when I had nothing left to offer but suffering." His voice cracked slightly. "Catherine will fight this. I know she will. She'll claim Aisha tricked me, poisoned me, controlled me. But it's a lie. All of it. And I'm recording this so that when I'm gone, the truth remains." He smiled one last time. "Aisha, if you're watching this, thank you. For everything. You made my last years bearable. Even beautiful. Don't let them take that from you." The video ended. The investigator sat back in his chair. "Well," he said quietly, "that's pretty damn clear." Catherine's world was collapsing. The video had been shared with the court. Her lawyers were scrambling, and the investigation into her conduct was expanding. Text messages between her and Agent Bradford had been uncovered. Messages showing that she had fed him false information, manipulated him into believing Aisha was an illegal immigrant, encouraged him to arrest her publicly to humiliate her. She'd even paid him $50,000 transferred to an offshore account. When confronted, Bradford cracked. "She told me the woman was undocumented," he said, hands shaking. "She showed me documents, fake ones, I guess. She said the widow had poisoned her ex-husband. I thought I was doing the right thing." "You arrested a U.S. citizen at a funeral without verifying a single fact," the investigator said coldly. "You didn't do the right thing. You did what a bitter woman paid you to do." Bradford was suspended immediately. His career was over. But Catherine wasn't done fighting. She held a press conference. "This is a witch hunt," she declared, standing in front of cameras, perfectly styled, perfectly composed. "I loved Alexander. I only wanted what was fair. That woman manipulated him when he was vulnerable. She took advantage of a sick, dying man." A reporter raised a hand. "Mrs. Ellis, have you seen the video?" Catherine's smile faltered. "What video?" "The one where your ex-husband explicitly states that you abandoned him and that he chose to leave everything to his current wife." Her face went pale. That video was doctored." "It's not. It's been authenticated by 3 independent experts." Catherine opened her mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time in her life, she had no response. 6 weeks later, the courtroom was packed. Media filled the back rows. Supporters of Aisha sat on one side. Catherine's remaining allies sat on the other, though that side was noticeably emptier. The judge, a silver-haired black woman named Judge Morgan, reviewed the case files in silence. Catherine sat at the defense table, her lawyers whispering urgently. Aisha sat on the other side, Victor Coleman beside her, his expression calm. Finally, Judge Morgan spoke. "This case," she began, "represents one of the most egregious abuses of power and manipulation I have seen in my 30 years on the bench." Catherine stiffened. "Mrs. Ellis, the former Mrs. Pierce, you filed false reports with federal authorities. You bribed a federal agent. You manipulated the immigration system to terrorize a lawful U.S. citizen. And you did all of this for one reason: greed." Judge Morgan's voice was steel. "You couldn't accept that your ex-husband moved on. You couldn't accept that he found love and care in his final years. So you tried to destroy the woman who gave him peace." She looked at Aisha. "Mrs. Aisha Pierce, I want to apologize on behalf of the justice system. You should never have been arrested. You should never have been humiliated. You should never have been accused of crimes you did not commit." Aisha's eyes filled with tears. Judge Morgan picked up her gavel. "This court rules entirely in favor of Aisha Pierce. Alexander Pierce's will stands. All assets, properties, and accounts belong to her, as was his clearly stated wish." The gavel slammed down. The courtroom erupted. Catherine shot to her feet. "This is insane." "Sit down," Judge Morgan ordered, "or I'll hold you in contempt." Catherine sat, trembling with rage. The judge wasn't done. "Catherine Ellis, you are hereby charged with filing false reports, conspiracy to abuse federal authority, bribery of a federal officer, and harassment. Bail is set at $500,000. Your trial date will be set within 30 days. Catherine's face went white. Her lawyers immediately started whispering about appeals, about technicalities, about how they could fight this. But it was over. Everyone in that courtroom knew it. Judge Morgan looked at Aisha one more time. "You are free to go, Mrs. Pierce, and you are free to live the life your husband wanted you to have." Aisha nodded, unable to speak. "If you believe justice should protect the innocent, not terrorize them, share the story. And subscribe, because we're not done exposing abuse and fighting for truth." Agent Bradford was fired. His pension was revoked. A federal investigation into his conduct resulted in criminal charges: accepting bribes, falsifying reports, abusing his authority. He would serve 3 years in federal prison. Catherine's trial came 2 months later. She was found guilty on all counts, sentenced to 5 years. Her appeals were denied. Her reputation was destroyed. The woman who had once commanded boardrooms and social circles was now a convicted felon, stripped of the wealth she'd fought so hard to reclaim. Meanwhile, Aisha honored Alexander's memory. She established a foundation in his name, funding medical research for the disease that took him, providing support for caregivers, offering resources for families dealing with terminal illness. She didn't do it for publicity. She did it because it's what Alexander would have wanted, and because it's who she was. 6 months after the funeral that had been so violently interrupted, Aisha returned to the cemetery. Alone. The grave was marked by a simple but elegant headstone. Alexander James Pierce, beloved husband, 1962 to 2026. Aisha knelt beside it, placing fresh flowers on the grass. "I won," she whispered. "You were right. The truth mattered." The wind rustled through the trees. She smiled softly. "I miss you. Every day. But I'm okay. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to live the life you wanted me to have." She stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "No cuffs. No fear. No more lies." Justice had spoken, and she was free. Aisha never remarried. She didn't need to. She had known real love, the kind that didn't demand perfection, didn't run when things got hard, didn't measure worth in dollars. She spent the rest of her life honoring that love. Through the foundation, through acts of kindness, through simply being the person Alexander had seen in her from the beginning. Catherine served her time in silence, bitter and alone. Agent Bradford was released after 3 years, his career destroyed, his name permanently tainted, and the world moved on. But Aisha never forgot. She never forgot the day she was arrested at her husband's funeral. She never forgot the humiliation, the fear, the injustice. But she also never forgot what came after. The truth, the vindication, the proof that love, real, selfless, enduring love, could not be buried by lies. She was arrested at a funeral. But the lies were the ones that died. If this story moved you, if you believe in justice, if you think love should win over greed, share this video. Subscribe to True Black Struggles. These stories need to be told. And we're just getting started.